The downtown street was buzzing with evening traffic when it happened. A heated argument between a uniformed police officer and a young woman drew curious eyes from nearby pedestrians. The officer's voice rose above the hum of the city, sharp and aggressive. The woman, calm yet firm, stood her ground. She wasn't yelling, but every word she spoke carried weight, as if she knew exactly what she was talking about. The officer didn't like it. His chest puffed, his jaw tightened, and frustration clouded his judgment. Passers-by later recalled how he ignored her attempts to reason with him, brushing aside her questions about his conduct. Suddenly, in an act that would define his career, the officer lost control. His fist shot forward and landed squarely across her face. Gasps erupted from the crowd. A woman staggered backward, clutching her cheek, her eyes flashing with a mixture of pain and restrained fury. Some people pulled out phones, recording the shocking moment. For a split second, the officer stood tall, convinced he had silenced a troublemaker. But then, the woman straightened her posture, and her expression shifted. She reached into her coat, revealing something no one had expected. The crowd went silent as she produced a badge, gleaming under the streetlights, stamped with 3 unmistakable letters, FBI. The officer's face drained of color. His heart pounded as reality crashed over him. This wasn't just a civilian he had assaulted, he had just punched a federal agent, one who now stood before him with the authority to end his career and dismantle his future. And as the murmurs of the crowd swelled into outrage, he realized too late that his life had just spiraled into a nightmare. The silence that followed was unbearable. For a moment, the officer couldn't breathe. The woman stood tall despite the swelling bruise forming on her cheek, her FBI badge still gleaming under the streetlights. The crowd, now restless and murmuring, surged with disbelief. People pointed, whispered, and raised their phones higher, ensuring every second of this scene was captured from every angle. The officer's confidence melted into panic. His hands trembled as he tried to justify his actions. She was interfering with an arrest, he stammered, though no one believed him. The woman's gaze cut into him, sharp and cold. She didn't need to shout. Her silence carried more authority than his words ever could. "Officer," she finally said, her voice steady but laced with steel, "you just assaulted a federal agent in front of dozens of witnesses." Those words landed harder than any punch. The officer's knees nearly buckled. Around him, the city seemed to close in. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, but here on this block, the true alarm was the crowd, angry, stunned, recording, and already sending clips into the digital world. The woman pressed her badge closer to his face, each word deliberate. FBI. "Internal Affairs will hear about this before the night ends. Your career is hanging by a thread you just cut yourself." He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The crowd began chanting, "Shame! Shame!" Their voices echoed off the buildings, amplifying his humiliation. Suddenly, the officer realized what was happening wasn't just a local embarrassment. Within minutes, the footage would go viral, spreading to newsrooms, government offices, and his department. His world wasn't just crumbling, it was exploding, and the explosion had only just begun. The chanting grew louder, echoing through the narrow downtown streets. The officer, once towering with authority, now stood frozen. His hands hovered uncertainly near his belt, but he dared not move. The woman's badge, her shield of justice, seemed to strip every ounce of power from him. The crowd's cameras zoomed in, catching the raw contrast, a bruised woman standing tall, calm, and composed, while the officer who had struck her trembled like a guilty child. Each flash of a phone screen captured a piece of history that would soon define careers, reputations, and maybe even lives. The woman didn't waste words. "Do you understand what you've done?" she asked, her voice low but commanding. The officer swallowed hard. His training had prepared him for criminals, for emergencies, even for riots. But not for this, not for striking someone who outranked his entire badge. "Agent," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Special agent," she corrected sharply, her eyes locked on his. A ripple went through the crowd at her declaration. People gasped, whispered louder, and recorded with even more fervor. It wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a scandal unfolding in real time. The officer stepped back, but the agent followed, refusing to let him retreat into shadows. "You think this ends with an apology?" she continued. "No, this is bigger than you, bigger than me. It's about trust in the badge you've disgraced." At that moment, sirens grew louder. Another squad car screeched to a halt nearby. 2 officers jumped out, confusion etched across their faces as they saw their colleague cornered by a federal agent and a furious crowd. The agent turned toward them, holding her badge high. "Arrest your partner," she commanded, and the stunned silence that followed was deafening. The two officers froze in disbelief. They glanced at their colleague, his face pale and drenched in sweat, then back at the woman who stood like an immovable wall of authority. Her FBI badge gleamed, leaving no room for doubt. "Arrest him," she repeated firmly, her tone unyielding. The crowd erupted in cheers, urging the officers to obey. Phones were raised higher, dozens of lenses capturing every twitch of hesitation. The two men exchanged uneasy glances. Loyalty to a fellow officer clashed violently with the undeniable truth staring them in the face. "Ma'am, maybe we should," one officer began. "Don't," she cut him off sharply. "Don't suggest sweeping this under the rug. Not here, not in front of witnesses. Do your duty." Her words carried a deadly calm. The silence afterward pressed on the younger officer, who looked like he wanted to do the right thing but lacked the courage. His partner, older and seasoned, clenched his jaw, torn between protecting the uniform and protecting his career. The disgraced officer broke the silence, his voice cracking. "You're not serious. You can't do this. We're on the same side." The FBI agent's eyes narrowed. "Justice doesn't have sides. You crossed the line the moment you raised your fist." Gasps rippled through the crowd as the two responding officers finally stepped forward. Their hesitation lingered, but the weight of the cameras pushed them closer. Slowly, almost painfully, one of them reached for his cuffs. The disgraced officer staggered back, panic in his eyes. "Wait! You can't!" But before he could finish, the click of steel echoed in the night. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices shaking the street. And in that moment, the officer realized his worst nightmare had only just begun. The sound of handcuffs locking around his wrists seemed to echo louder than the sirens still wailing in the distance. The officer's mouth fell open in disbelief. Never in his career, never in his wildest fears, had he imagined standing cuffed in front of a jeering crowd, cameras pointed like weapons aimed at his downfall. "Unbelievable," someone shouted from the crowd. "Justice at last," another yelled. The FBI agent didn't flinch. Her cheek throbbed, the bruise darkening, but she stood tall, her composure commanding the moment. She stepped closer, her voice calm but merciless. "Every second of this is evidence. Every bystander is now a witness. You're not just under arrest, you're a symbol of everything wrong when power goes unchecked." The officer twisted, desperation flooding his words. "You don't understand." "I thought—" "No," she cut him off coldly. "You didn't think, you acted. And now everyone sees you for what you are." The younger officer holding the cuffs looked shaken, sweat trickling down his temple. He muttered, almost under his breath, "Ma'am, this is going to be complicated." "Justice always is," she replied firmly. Meanwhile, the crowd surged closer, their chants shifting into demands. "Fire him! Fire him!" Social media feeds lit up in real time, videos streaming worldwide before the officer had even been placed in the squad car. Reporters, tipped off within minutes, were already rushing toward the scene. A scandal was breaking, unstoppable, growing like wildfire. As the disgraced officer was pushed into the back of the car, his mind spun with terror. His badge, his reputation, his career, gone. And worse, deep down, he knew the agent wasn't finished with him yet. By the time the squad car door slammed shut, the street was chaos. Reporters had already arrived, microphones outstretched, shouting questions over the roar of the crowd. News vans screeched around the corner, their satellite dishes pointing skyward, ready to beam the story across the nation. The FBI agent stood calm in the storm, her badge in one hand, her phone in the other, as she typed a rapid report to headquarters. She knew the Bureau would want eyes on this immediately. Her bruise was evidence, the videos, evidence, the crowd, witnesses. The case was ironclad before it even entered a courtroom. Inside the patrol car, the disgraced officer pressed his forehead against the glass, his chest heaving. He could already imagine the headlines: "Police officer assaults woman, discovers she's FBI." His family would see it, his chief would see it, the world would see it. He pounded the glass with his cuffed fists. "This isn't fair. I didn't know. She didn't tell me." But the crowd outside wasn't sympathetic. People laughed bitterly at his excuses. Some shouted, "You wouldn't have cared if she wasn't FBI." Others yelled, "What about all the times you weren't caught?" The agent stepped toward the cameras. Her voice carried authority, cutting through the chaos. "This isn't just about me, it's about accountability. Too many think the badge makes them untouchable. Tonight proves otherwise." Her words struck the crowd like electricity. Cheers erupted, louder than before, echoing up the city's buildings. The older officer standing nearby shook his head, muttering, "This is going to hit the department like a bomb." And he was right. At headquarters, phones were already ringing off the hook. Commanders scrambled for damage control, but it was too late. The story was out, and there was no turning back. Inside the precinct, tension crackled like a live wire. Phones rang non-stop, reporters flooded the lobby, and officers whispered nervously in corners. The footage of the punch had already gone viral. News anchors replayed it in slow motion, over and over, each broadcast slicing deeper into the department's reputation. In his office, Police Chief Reynolds slammed his fist onto the desk. "Do you realize what he's done?" His voice thundered at the cluster of senior officers gathered before him. None dared speak. Reynolds paced like a caged animal, his face flushed red. "An officer of this department punched a woman in public. That's bad enough. But an FBI agent?" He stopped, glaring at each face in the room. "This isn't a scandal. It's a career-ending catastrophe for him and possibly for us." One captain cleared his throat cautiously. "Sir, damage control is already impossible. The video has tens of millions of views. Hashtags are trending. The mayor's office called, the governor's office called, and—" He hesitated. "The Bureau wants a full investigation." The chief cursed under his breath, slamming a file shut. He's finished. No badge, no pension. He's about to become the face of everything wrong with policing in this country. An uneasy silence followed. No one dared defend the disgraced officer. Loyalty couldn't survive the weight of public outrage. Reynolds leaned on his desk, his voice dropping low. "Find me every detail about that agent, who she is, what she was doing there. And pray to God she doesn't decide to make this personal, or we'll be cleaning up for decades." A young lieutenant swallowed hard. "Sir, she already made it personal. She pressed charges." The chief's eyes darkened. "Then heaven help us all." Special Agent Claire Donovan sat in the quiet of a federal field office conference room, ice pressed gently against her bruised cheek. Her reflection in the glass wall was sharp, a woman of discipline, now marked by violence, yet her eyes burned not with pain but with unshakable determination. Across from her sat Assistant Director Marcus Hale, a seasoned man with grey streaks in his hair and a voice that carried weight. "Claire, the Bureau doesn't take assaults on agents lightly. He'll be prosecuted. The department's already in meltdown." Claire leaned forward, her tone controlled. "This isn't about one bad cop. This is about a culture that lets anger and arrogance wear the badge. If I let this slide, what message does that send? That agents are untouchable but civilians aren't? No. This fight has to mean something." Hale studied her for a long moment. "You're aware this could get ugly. Political. They'll paint you as overstepping. They'll dig into your past, your cases, everything." "I'm ready," Claire said firmly. "I won't back down. If they want to fight, let them. But this time, the cameras are on us, not them." Her words echoed with steel. She wasn't just a victim, she was becoming a symbol. Outside the conference room, agents moved quickly, assembling files, downloading the viral footage and drafting reports. The Bureau was mobilizing. Meanwhile, the world outside was boiling. Social media split into factions. Some hailed her bravery, others rushed to defend the disgraced officer. Talk shows debated, pundits shouted, hashtags surged. Claire closed her eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. She knew the storm had only begun, and she had no intention of walking away from it. By morning, the story had consumed the nation. Every news station replayed the punch on loop, dissecting every frame like evidence in a trial. Commentators argued fiercely, some condemning the officer outright, others defending him as a man who made a mistake. But the internet was merciless. Hashtags like #JusticeForClaire and #BadgeAbuse trended globally. Millions demanded reform. Petitions flooded online platforms, and influencers amplified the footage to audiences around the world. In the officer's neighborhood, reporters camped outside his home. Neighbors shook their heads, some expressing disbelief, others muttering that they weren't surprised. His wife refused interviews, shielding their children from the media frenzy. But whispers spread quickly about his past temper, complaints that had been ignored, red flags buried by his department. Meanwhile, Claire's face filled television screens, her bruise a visible reminder of unchecked power. She refused interviews at first, but her silence only fueled speculation. Commentators praised her dignity, contrasting it with the officer's meltdown in the patrol car. At City Hall, protests erupted. Crowds marched with signs reading, "Badges don't excuse violence and justice for all, not just the powerful." The air buzzed with chants, anger, and hope, as if the city itself demanded accountability. Legal analysts predicted disaster for the police department. Civil rights lawyers circled like hawks, preparing lawsuits. Politicians scrambled to make statements, some siding with law enforcement, others siding with the FBI agent. For the disgraced officer, it felt like drowning. Every channel showed his face, every headline painted him as the villain. His phone was confiscated, but he knew his name would be cursed forever. And for Claire, the weight grew heavier. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about the country, about every abuse that had gone unseen. The nation was watching. And judgment was coming. The interrogation room was sterile, its buzzing fluorescent lights unforgiving. The disgraced officer sat cuffed to the table, sweat soaking through his uniform. Across from him, 2 FBI agents observed silently, letting the silence choke him before asking a single question. Finally, Special Agent Claire Donovan entered. The room shifted instantly. She didn't sit. She stood, towering in authority. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, sharp against her calm expression. The officer looked up, his voice shaky. "Agent Donovan, I didn't know. If I'd known who you were—" "That's the problem," Claire interrupted coldly. "You thought you could treat a stranger like that. You thought the badge gave you the right to use violence without consequence. Whether I was FBI or not shouldn't matter, but to you it does. That says everything." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the 2 agents flanking her. They stared back, stone-faced. He was cornered, stripped of the authority he once abused so freely. Claire leaned closer, her voice low but cutting. "Tell me, was it worth it? Was your pride worth your career, your reputation, your freedom?" The officer's lips trembled. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. One agent slid a file onto the table. "We've been reviewing your history. Complaints, excessive force reports, incidents buried by your department. That ends now. The world knows who you are." The officer's chest tightened. He'd thought those skeletons were buried deep, protected by silence and brotherhood. Now, every secret threatened to surface. Claire straightened, her final words searing into him. "You didn't just hit me, you struck at justice, and justice strikes back." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving him in suffocating silence. Inside the precinct, whispers spread like wildfire. Officers who once shared drinks and laughter with the disgraced cop now avoided eye contact. His name had become poison, a stain threatening to drag everyone down with him. The Union Hall was in chaos. Some officers demanded full support for their colleague, claiming he was hung out to dry. Others argued bitterly that defending him would destroy what little credibility the department still had. The room split in two, loyalty against survival. Chief Reynolds addressed them with a grim face. "This isn't a fight we can win. The Bureau's involved, the media's relentless, and the public wants blood. If we back him, we all go down." A younger officer slammed his fist on the table. "So we just abandon him? He wore the same uniform as us." Another shot back. "He disgraced the uniform. There's a difference." The argument spiraled, old grudges surfacing, divisions widening. The so-called blue wall of silence was cracking, and everyone felt it. Meanwhile, Claire's image dominated national broadcasts. Talk shows debated her every word, calling her a modern symbol of accountability. For many, she wasn't just an agent. She was a reminder that no badge placed anyone above the law. Back in his holding cell, the disgraced officer sat hunched, listening to the distant hum of a television from the guard station. His own face appeared on the screen, replaying the punch, the arrest, the handcuffs, over and over. He covered his ears, but it didn't matter. The sound lived in his mind. The cheers of the crowd, the click of the cuffs, Claire's unyielding words, they echoed endlessly. For the first time he realized he wasn't just fighting for his job anymore, he was fighting against the inevitable. And he was losing. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, every corner occupied by reporters, activists, and citizens who had followed the story from the first viral clip. The air buzzed with anticipation. Everyone knew this wasn't just a trial of one man, it was a trial of the system itself. The disgraced officer sat at the defense table, pale and weary. His once pressed uniform had been replaced by a wrinkled suit, his badge long surrendered. He glanced nervously at the gallery, where people stared with hard eyes, some holding signs demanding justice. At the prosecution's table sat Claire Donovan, her bruise now healed but her resolve sharper than ever. She didn't flinch under the barrage of flashing cameras. She was here not for vengeance, but for truth. The judge entered, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. The trial began. Prosecutors wasted no time. They presented the video, the slow-motion punch replayed on the giant screen. Gasps filled the courtroom, though most had seen it 100 times already. Each witness took the stand, bystanders, officers, experts, all confirming the same thing: the violence was unjustified, reckless, and deliberate. The defense tried to spin it. They argued stress, confusion, misinterpretation. They painted Claire as confrontational, even manipulative. But every argument collapsed under the weight of evidence and the piercing clarity of her testimony. When Claire took the stand, the room leaned in. "He didn't see a badge that night," she said, her voice steady. "He saw a woman he thought he could silence with force. The only difference was that this time the cameras were watching." Her words echoed in the hushed courtroom, reverberating through every wall. The officer's head sank lower. He knew there was no escape. Judgment was near. The jury filed back into the courtroom after hours of tense deliberation. Every eye followed them, the air so heavy with anticipation it felt like no one was breathing. The disgraced officer gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles white, sweat dripping from his temple. Claire sat poised, calm, yet her heart pounded with the weight of the moment. The judge cleared his throat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" A foreman stood, a folded piece of paper in his trembling hands. "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom froze as the paper was passed to the judge, then handed back to the foreman to read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." The word echoed like a gunshot. Gasps filled the room, followed by an eruption of cheers from the gallery. Reporters bolted for the doors, ready to broadcast the news nationwide. Protesters outside erupted into celebration, their chants echoing through the courthouse walls. The officer's face drained of color. He collapsed back into his chair, shaking his head violently. "No, no, this can't be happening," his attorney whispered frantically, but the noise drowned him out. The verdict was final. Claire closed her eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. Not with triumph, but with relief. Justice had spoken, not just for her, but for every unseen victim of unchecked power. The judge's gavel pounded. "Order, sentencing will be scheduled immediately." As marshals moved to escort the disgraced officer away, he locked eyes with Claire one last time. His expression was not anger, but fear, the realization that his downfall would forever define him. The cameras outside roared, broadcasting the verdict to millions. Around the world, people watched, and for once, they saw accountability. But for Claire, the battle wasn't over. Not yet. The courthouse steps overflowed with people, their chants rising into the sky. Cameras flashed as Claire Donovan stepped outside, flanked by fellow agents. The bruise that once marked her cheek had faded, but the symbol of her stand burned brighter than ever. Microphones thrust toward her. "Agent Donovan, do you feel justice was served?" one reporter shouted. Claire paused, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces, protesters, supporters, ordinary citizens who had demanded accountability. She spoke with measured calm. "Justice isn't about one verdict. It's about building a system where no one fears the badge and no one hides behind it. Today was a step. Tomorrow we take another." Her words ignited the crowd, cheers thundering like a wave. Across the city, the disgraced officer sat in chains, awaiting transfer to prison. The uniform he once wore with pride was gone, replaced by a jumpsuit that stripped him of power. His name, once spoken with respect in the precinct, had become a warning whispered in shame. He had become the example others feared becoming. In the precinct itself, change stirred uneasily. Training programs were revised, oversight increased, and complaints once buried were now scrutinized. Officers whispered Claire's name with equal parts resentment and respect. She had forced a reckoning. That night, Claire stood alone in her apartment, staring out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed non-stop, congratulations, interviews, requests. But she silenced them. This wasn't about fame, it was about principle. She touched the faint scar left by the punch, a reminder of the night everything changed. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who demanded better. And as the city roared outside, Claire knew one thing with certainty: the system had been warned. From now on, no badge would be above the law.